Today's guest is Seth Troutt. Man, he's a pastor. He's a writer. He does a lot of writing. He's the host of a new podcast called Authentic Masculinity. And he speaks really boldly into culture. He helps men navigate faith, manhood, modern life. Does it with clarity, does it with conviction, which I appreciate. He's a husband, a dad, and honestly, he's a theologian in many ways, as I've heard him communicate and as I read his writing. And he's not afraid to challenge people's takes on masculinity or even the idolization of things like strength in masculinity. And you're going to really love this one. Seth, thanks for jumping on with me, man.
Yeah, good to meet you, Eddie. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Man, you talk a lot about how real masculinity, it means taking responsibility, means living with purpose. How do you think things like I talk about on my show, working out, eating clean, taking care of your body, how do those things tie into that?
Yeah, one of the things that I think help us make sense of masculinity, sometimes we talk about that only as opposed to femininity, and I think that kind of misses the mark. I do think one of the core categories for us to make sense of masculinity has to do with how masculinity is opposed to childishness, right? Masculinity versus femininity is a valid and necessary category, but masculinity versus childishness or manhood versus boyhood is a big part of that. I think when Paul says act like men, which like the Greek word, there's andrizomai, where we get like the idea of androgenic is like it's like courageous, it's overcoming, but it's really about the capacity to have self-discipline. And I think about one of the qualifications of an elder is how could someone manage the household of God if he doesn't take care of his household? And so this care, like the ability to take care of yourself, take care of others, that's responsibility. It's, can you be trusted to steward your life, to be a responsible person? And I do think that really begins with yourself. I've heard it said, if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead other people. If you can't care for yourself, you can't care for other people. And that need to take care of yourself is certainly part of that, right? There's a term that I like from this book I bought in an airport. Bill Bryson wrote a book called The Body, A Guide for Occupants. I just saw it in the airport and thought, that looks interesting. I just finished my book, picked it up. And he said one of the miracles of the human bodies, this guy's a non-Christian, is he says that it takes about 65 years to commit slow suicide or suicide by lifestyle, which is a category that kind of, I just had to put the book down and think, that kind of summarized a lot of my instincts on the topic, right? So my mom taught aerobics classes growing up. My dad's a PE teacher. And what's weird is the first place I got kind of reprimanded or scolded about going to the gym or caring about my body was from the church. The church is saying something like, hey, isn't the body going to all just get exploded and we're going to be like, doesn't care for your body, isn't that kind of pagan? And I was really disoriented by that, even in high school, going, wait a minute, like last week at church, they're saying your body tells you the truth about sex and gender, but then today we're saying your body doesn't tell you the truth about health and fitness and exercise and all this kind of the need for sleep and food and exercise. And it made me think about, as I've done more thinking and reading about it, is the Sixth Commandment, which is thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not murder is probably a better translation. And in the Westminster Confession of Faith, one of the things it says is like an application of that is there's both the positive command, like or the negative command, don't murder, but there's also like the positive that goes along with it, which is whatever the opposite of murdering is, do that, which is like the preservation of life, like the supporting of life, the promoting of life. And so they talk about, this is, 400 years ago, prudent use of food and drink and right exercise of the body. That's 400 years ago. They're talking about that, and how obeying the Sixth Commandment includes not committing suicide by lifestyle or committing slow suicide. And so that whole category as being not just like do it so that you can live longer and play with your great grandkids, which I think is a great motive, but also do it because you want to obey the Sixth Commandment, which is to promote your own flourishing, to not commit suicide by lifestyle. And I think that the concept or the capacity for that has only radically increased the last 100, 150 years. 200 years ago, everybody's homesteading, farming, working the plow. You don't need to like think about exercise because your whole life is exercising. You got to get outside and move some dirt and plant some seeds. Whereas now, with the increase of tech work, the increase of office culture, the increase of sedentary lifestyles, people's flow of life doesn't create that. So you have to kind of on purpose create that. And so I do think responsibility and like a management, like am I managing myself? Am I stewarding myself is a big part of all of that.
I've never, this is great because I happen to be in the 10 Commandments and we're only on Commandment 4, Seth.
Oh,
So
you got
I,
time. There
I
you
get to
go.
use what you just said in my sermon because I love that. So you say, so run this back for people that are listening. Westminster Confession talks about this sort of like promoting your own flourishing, this sort of opposite, the other end of the Sixth Commandment. Can you like bake that out a little more?
Yeah, it says the duties required in the Sixth Commandment is what it's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's getting at is the presumption is obviously there's like the on the surface command, which is don't wrongly kill. But here's, it also says this. I'll just read it to you. I looked it up real quick. It says, the duties required in the Sixth Commandment are careful studies, lawful endeavors to preserve the life of ourselves and others by resisting all thoughts and purposes, subduing passions, avoiding occasions, temptations, practices, which tend to the unjust taking away of life, including quietness of mind, cheerfulness of spirit, sober use of meat, drink, physic, sleep, labor, and recreation. And so even 400 years ago, when they're thinking about this, they're going, we want to be thoughtful about what we put into our body, thoughtful about how we use our body. And they didn't do that from just like a self-care, self-love, self-esteem culture like tends to happen now. This is about obeying the Sixth Commandment. We don't want to be slowly killing ourselves in the name of like some type of passive inactivity.
That's fascinating that they could catch that 400 years ago, where we think they're so primitive and they have no idea what they're talking about, and now we're so advanced and we've got antibiotics and food dyes and artificial sweeteners. Like we certainly know more about this than they do, and yet here they are talking about it from a spiritual perspective, right? It goes beyond the sort of, hey, make sure that you lose weight and can fit into the sort of airplane seat comfortably. It goes beyond that. It's less vain and more theological, which I really, really appreciate. It's crazy to
Yeah,
think about.
you're going, if God designed my body with limits, so even you think when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, they had to do maintenance of their body even before the fall. Like they had
Mm.
to eat of the tree. So they had to go on, they had to take care of their bodies by eating before sin even entered the world. And so there was a stewardship thing with our bodies being made in God's image. That's not just a post-fall thing, but it's also a pre-fall thing, that we were designed to be, we were designed to require maintenance. And that was before sin entered the world, before there was brokenness, that there was still maintenance required. It obviously looked different. You're not going to hurt your elbow pulling a fruit off the tree of good in life, from in the Garden of Eden, but you still have to take care of your body. That required maintenance pre-fall. And even Jesus' remarks to the disciples when he's like resurrected, and he says, the next time I eat and drink of this with you will be in the new heavens and new earth.
Yeah.
That there will still probably be some type of bodily care that has to go on in our resurrected bodies. Like you still eat, require calories, require investment into our physical selves, even in the new creation.
So what happened in this last 400 years where and maybe we never knew it fully, but what's gone on? I had Pastor Matt Chandler on a while ago. I also had Dr. Greg Allison on, wrote a good book called Embodiment on this, and he talked a little bit about how Gnosticism sort of creeped in, and we've kind of divided the self, the physical self, from the spiritual self. Like what's gone on in the sense, because for the most part, most pulpits, we don't talk about this, we don't address it. It's obviously integral to the way we even sustain ourselves and exist. And yet we sort of go, hey, don't talk about it. It's vanity. Let's focus in on the spiritual stuff. Let's focus on prayer, discipleship, etc. What do you think has gone on in the church, and why this isn't a bigger topic?
Well, I think part of that, to give the benefit of the doubt, is a overcorrection to like a body obsessed vain culture, where you go to check out the grocery store and you get bombarded with like sexualized ads of men and women, 5 quick ways to lose 30 pounds, how to get shredded for summer, how to do X, Y, and Z. And Christians are going, man, like there's more important stuff than having an 8-pack for summer. Like, how about your soul? How about your life with God? How about eternal things, not temporal things? And the language will be like, hey, you know what? Time always wins. You will certainly die. Quit buying into this belief that you can like extend your life forever. Like you can't do it. You will stand before your creator. You will be judged. You will need to be covered in the blood of the lamb, or you're going to be separated from him forever. So there's like probably like an overcorrection against like the body obsessed culture that we get. It's, you get on Instagram and it's just a bunch of like steroided up, photoshopped,
Totally.
satiated shoulder type people. And you're going, this doesn't seem healthy. And so then Christians tend to overcorrect and go, what really matters is your soul. And from an eternal perspective, there's a sense in which that's true.
Yeah.
But I think also within the Christian church, this kind of emphasis on like otherworldly, that what God's going to do is he's going to come back and take us away, where you get raptured off this planet and be somewhere else. And the here and now doesn't really matter. And so forget about it. Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's probably some of that's appropriate correction that became overcorrection. I also think it is relatively new, like the gluttonous disposition, the artificial foods, the addictive nature of their current food culture. It's not something they were dealing with 300, 600, 1,000 years ago. Like to overeat back then, you had to be like really committed to it. You had to like really be super gluttonous, and you probably had to drink a lot to like numb the stomach so you could overindulge. Whereas like right now, if you went and tried to overeat steak and broccoli, your stomach would probably start hurting before you could do a ton. But you could very easily put away 3 sleeves of Pringles, like no problem. Right. So we actually had a lady, we do a Ask Anything once a year at the church for people just texting questions and we respond. And when we got a lady texting the question, like, when will you talk more about gluttony? Because I don't struggle with porn. I don't act out sexually. But the times I hate myself most are when I just nail a bag of Chips Ahoy. And I'm like, what happened? I was watching a show, then I'm 40 cookies deep and I hate myself. Can you speak more about this, please? Because I do think that the way their food even works now, just like with sexuality, like sexual sin is taken on different energy with digital technology and internet. And I think it's similar with the artificial foods, that it is much easier than it has been in world history to be gluttonous. Before, you kind of had to be a king. You had to be like super upper class.
Right.
You kind of, only a certain percent of people. It's maybe why even in the Westminster Confession of Faith, people are writing about sober use of meat and drink and medicine. It's because these people who are writing this, they were in the different stratosphere. They were the academics, they were the elites, the people who could read and write and had space to think, whereas the majority population is not really thinking about that. Like the academics and the aristocrats were the people who maybe could commit the sin of gluttony, whereas now everybody can without exception.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, and it's easy to overlook the modified nature of foods. I mean, these things are engineered in a lab to induce cravings. They play on your hormones and your ghrelin, so your hunger hormones, all these different things in order to get you to eat, and they're easily digestible. They probably lack fiber. You could eat a lot of it in a short amount of time. And even if you feel sick, your body for some reason will still crave them like an hour later. And it's shocking how quickly the food can go down and how quick of an impact it has on your waistline and your blood markers. And it's rapid at this point. To your point, 400 years ago, it was very difficult to do. Now, I don't have one of whatever you're talking about when it tells you that your stomach's full of steak, but I'm sure most other people do. I can't find that line yet. Is it?
Well, that's probably
ounces?
Fortunate. Yeah, I have no idea. But I do think there is also, depending on the household you grew up in, right? Like there is like a food insecurity thing that I think some people have in their family of origin, where there is like, now maybe they're wealthy enough where they can eat all the way. They don't have to like stop for the sake of preserving resources. So some people I know, it's like there's like some childhood wounds that need to be worked through, that just kind of trying to stop is nice, but you also have to like address the core wound before you're able to find the self-control and the appropriate like balance on how you want to eat and those types of things. So I do think it's easier than ever. And I think we understand that when it comes to sexuality is like the lab, the tech, the way it shapes things. There's like a higher degree of empathy. And I think people have that for food. Like I think everyone knows what it's like to overeat and then suffer and go, wow, that overpromised and underdelivered. Like I
Yeah.
remember one time I even had to fire a guy when I was 23. I had to fire this guy who was in his 40s, had 4 kids.
Whoa.
And this is like a coping mechanism story, is I had to fire this guy. And then kind of next thing I knew, I was at Starbucks and I ate 5 donuts and I'm going, what happened to me? You know, so
Wow.
there's almost like a comfort instinct that I do think is in there on the gluttony side of things. Like I feel bad. I don't want to feel bad. So some of it's just like lack of coping skills emotionally that people just turn to a substance over and against like an internal process. So I know I have a history of some of that in more acute ways. So some people might have that going on as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had that in my past. I mean, my mom was obese for my entire young life. She certainly diabetic, hypertensive. She ended up passing away of cancer when I was 13. And I watched my mom sort of silently suffer through her eating. And I developed some of those habits. I know my sister did as well. And it's not as if we're all sitting around going, man, I just want to eat as much as I possibly can. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot more emotionally probably happening, spiritually happening, where it's like, man, if I didn't have this measure of coping mechanism, would I even be alive? I'm not sure. And, as pastors, we want people to find depth of healing in that. And so it's not as simple as saying, hey, just stop eating now and get ripped. It doesn't work like that. Human beings aren't just like math equations where it's plus and minus. It's multifaceted, it's nuanced, with multiple things happening at play. And yet, like going back to your point on the church saying, oh, it's look at all the vanity that's around us. Certainly Instagram, whatever it is, TikTok, the magazine racks, like, we're going to sort of overcorrect against that. I think, like you said, there's a lot of good in that idea. But what we kind of do see statistically is the far majority of people are potentially closer to maybe even bodily neglect than they might be to this sort of like vain, ripped Instagram model type image. So what I mean by that is, 1 in every 2 people has a chronic disease. 1 in 4 has multiple chronic diseases. We're talking 99% of Medicare and Medicaid dollars spent on chronic illnesses and lifestyle issues. I mean, Chris Kresser, he wrote a book called Unconventional Medicine. He called chronic disease a slow motion plague, but more wide scale. And I think that speaks to it really well. So we are seeing the impact of sort of these like bioengineered foods on top of maybe even on a smaller scale, like this like lack of attention we've given to this from a spiritual side. What do you think about that? Do you think that certainly it's multifaceted, but do you see the impact in culture and society at large of sort of this like not addressing health?
Yeah, it kind of becomes taboo to talk about it, both in the church and outside of the church. It ends up being a conversation that kind of gets coded in terms of like privilege, right? As though like if you can think about eating high quality food and exercising, that means that you're certainly upper middle class and you have a lot of free time and you have margin in your life. And so asking people to do that is actually you not like checking your privilege or whatever. And that's kind of the way the political thing ends up going. Like I know that it's kind of like it's infuriating to me to a degree that I'm almost uncomfortable admitting as a pastor, the kind of money laundering circle between big foods and EBT and the healthcare industry and
Yes.
the way that this kind of cycle that when people get really sick, then healthcare companies profit, hospitals profit. And when people eat really healthy, big food loses money, healthcare loses money. So I don't think people have to be like conspiracy theorists or assume the worst about people, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. And I think this kind of attention economy and the way it shapes people's approach to healthcare and food, people are making lots of money off of it. And so there's not really an incentive to stop
Yeah.
it. And I know that there's like on the whole like make America healthy again thing, there's a lot of like super weird unpro-life stuff in that culture that I'm super against. But like if the message is eat fruits, veggies, meat, and go and get sweaty, however you want to do it, then I'm pretty into that. That sounds pretty great for people. And you
Yeah.
think about the emotional problems, like the relational problems, that even just physical health Like we talk about like the mental health crisis, and trying to divorce that from the physical health crisis is pretty impossible.
Yeah.
That our nervous system is our nervous system, our body is our body, that emotions are very largely embodied, processed activities that have to do with our gut and our brain. And so physical health really kind of makes emotional health more likely and more possible. That if you're not sleeping well, if you're not, if your hormones aren't doing well, it's pretty hard to be emotionally healthy as well, and that creates a whole another list of problems in society. So, I'm with you. I'm grieved by it, and on a societal level, I have no idea what the way forward is. But I do think
Yeah.
podcasts like this and pastors trying to at least try to promote health in their local churches is a big step.
It's not, like you mentioned, it's not, we shouldn't ignore the fact that it's to the benefit of some of these large major corporations, these billion-dollar corporations, that you are unhealthy and sick. We shouldn't ignore that fact. If the love of money is the root of all evil, and big pharma, like large billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies, billion-dollar food agricultural companies, they benefit when you are unhealthy, and when you are sick, you go to the doctor, and the medications that come with it, like that all is in play. And maybe it's nefarious and insidious, and maybe it's not. All that to say that we do need to be responsible for our own health. We can't outsource that because we believe that either the government or some company or some organization has our best interests at heart. We need to be able to take responsibility for that ourselves. And I've just seen a lot of outsourcing, and we just can't do that any longer. There's just too many variables. And so hopefully we begin to take it seriously as individuals, and maybe even communally as congregations.
Oh, for sure. And there was good momentum. It's now illegal to market cigarettes to children. You
Yeah.
can't have people drinking alcohol in commercials. Why? Because people decided that they cared about children more than they cared about money, or at least they decided they want to be seen as caring about children more than they care about money, from a brand perspective. And when we're going to do that with uh, sodas and Pop Tarts and other things that really harm kids, I'm not sure. But we've done it before as a society. We've decided this is bad for kids, so let's knock it off. And so I'm positive on the possibility that might happen.
It's shocking that, okay, you cause a little commotion in 119 days or something like that, and In-N-Out Burger all of a sudden says no more artificial dyes. Kellogg says we're going to remove all seed oils, etc., or whatever it is, out, within 3 or 4 months of just the public opinion sort of turning on these things. And forget how much power that the American people do actually have as it relates to these things if we're vocal about it. So it is good to see some changes, because there are people that are none the wiser. One thing I like to see change as it relates to kids is what happens in the cafeterias at these schools. As someone who grew up in free lunch and ate some of the stuff I ate, I would love to see kids that aren't, that don't have the means to bring their own lunch to school or to buy lunch or whatever, not just be fed stuff that's going to get them sick and make them addicted and play into the, if you're generationally impoverished like I was, and you come into a school and the only source of happiness you have is like the 140 grams of sugar you get, that's creating a vicious cycle that I think we should probably take note of.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I do think Christians should care about public policy because we care about the public, and we're a part of creating those policies. And again, that looks like 1,000 different ways for 1,000 different people. But supporting those efforts, I feel like I have a hard time arguing against that. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about men for a second. You've, in your podcast, you push back on some of the pressure that guys feel around their body image and things like that. And I know we've talked a little bit about vanity. And what's the healthy biblical way in your mind for men to begin to care about their fitness and their own body without turning it into some sort of like pursuit of like this bodybuilding.com, ripped guy, or just ignoring it altogether? Like, what do you think?
I think it's pretty seasonally dependent, right? So when you're in the NFL, what you're responsible to do as far as your training is different than what it is now. Likewise, when I was playing volleyball, my goals were different than they are now. And I do think that there's a piece of me, especially still being relatively young, that wants to have a competitive side. And I do think competition isn't bad. I do think competition is a great way to it's a good motivator. It can be done in good brotherly fun to try to bench more than your buddy. That's a fun thing. I do think there's a season where I was doing competitive Olympic weightlifting, snatch, clean, and jerk, and I would be pushing it real hard on squats a couple times a week. Then I'd be in the pulpit, kind of hunched over, trying to preach the word because my lower back hurt because I was ruining it on Thursday in the gym, and going, okay, my priorities are out of line here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to act like I'm 22 when I'm 32. I need to re-envision some of these things. And then I started interacting with a lot of Peter Attia's stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
He
Oh,
he
for
wrote the
sure.
book. He wrote the book Outlive, and one of the things that's been helpful for me is the various things that he recommends that actually really slow down aging and can delay the decline of health span, right? And so I used to look at people doing zone 2 cardio and think that they're just wasting their time pretending to exercise because it looks like if it's not high intensity, then
Yeah.
it's nothing. And I did CrossFit competitively for 10 or 12 years, and the idea of you're taking it easy, but then I read the data on it. I'm like, oh, this zone 2 thing, it
Yeah.
really staves off atherosclerosis. My grandpa died of a stroke. I need to think about that. It really
Ah.
staves off uh, insulin resistance and diabetic type things. That's in my family. It pushes back on the hardening of the plaques in the heart. It supports cardiovascular wellness. You're like, oh, if one of my goals is to be a good grandpa, a good great grandpa one day, if I want to be healthy in my 80s, now that I know the data says I should probably do an hour more of zone 2. And once I turn 40 something, I should probably do more like 2 to 3 hours of that, and then also you're kind of looking at one of the things that harms people as they age is they become a fall risk. And so you kind of want to make sure that's why quad thickness is a predictor on lifespan. It's because how much coordination and muscle you have makes it
Mm.
you more or less likely to fall. All right, well, I want to add in some workouts that are going to make it less likely that I'd fall. Right, my grandma's 92 and she's still banging on all cylinders. She lives by herself, has stairs, and people keep trying to tell her let's get you into one story. She's like, no, these stairs save my life. They keep me
Yeah.
alive. I got to be able to go up and go down because life has curbs, and if the only time I see a curb is once a week at the grocery store, it's going to kill me. But if I do these stairs, I could have to catch and things like that. So, I had a mentor who helped oversee my dissertation named Dan Doriani, and he told me that his definition of fit for himself was can do 9 pull-ups and can carry his wife 100 meters. And he at the time was, I think he was in his late 60s, and he's like, I want to be able to, when I'm 90, be able to carry my wife 100 meters, right? So she could roll her ankle in her house. I can carry her out to the curb. That's my definition of fitness, where I'm able to serve my wife in that type of way. That's very different than trying to back squat 500 pounds or deadlift 600 pounds or bend, there's those kind of arbitrary numbers, but a very functional definition for that, which I think is great for a lot of guys to think about as we're trying to think about, are we stewarding our body? What we're asking is, can I do what I want to do with my body? And I think about the way my workouts have changed since having kids. I want to be able to any moment pick up and play with my kids, wrestling around, play in the pool, toss them overhead. And if I'm doing stuff that gets in the way of that, where my lower back hurts, my knees hurt, my shoulders hurting because I'm trying to set 1 rep maxes on stuff, then I'm undercutting myself in my primary vocation of father in a way that I'm just kind of do ego lifting at the gym. And so I do think there's a shift there based on season of life, various callings, contexts. And one of my best buds, we did CrossFit competitions together, and he's a big dude, and he's super athletic and really strong, and now he's got a daughter, and he's like, I got to rethink this, because deadlifting 600 pounds isn't making me a better dad. I got to re-envision, reimagine, maybe lean out. And there's just the seasonal dependence, seasonal calling. I do think the older you get, the more long cardio you should do, because it's going to help you prevent heart disease. And when you're younger, you're kind of trying to add as much muscle as you can before 40, because it's really hard to add it without artificial testosterone afterwards. So you kind of got to get what you can
Right.
before 40 and then try to lose it as slow as possible after 40. That's my general thought process on that. But I mean, this, you're in the NFL, at a certain point, super fit equals unhealthy.
Mhm.
Like you watch Dirk Nowitzki walk around after his NBA career and you go like, man, that guy was super fit for a long time and now he can barely walk. And
Mhm.
there is a point at which fitness becomes unhealthy. I think that's like bodybuilders are a great example of that. Super fit, 4% body fat, not healthy, not good for anybody.
That's
Not just
really good.
mentally, but physically as well. And so I think if you think about health, which I like the CrossFit definition of that, which is the ability to function across broad time and modal domains as you age. Like that's a great definition for health. Like it's functional and it
Love
includes
that.
and considers aging. It's a really good way I think about things.
I didn't know that was their definition. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I
because
did CrossFit for a long time, but I don't remember that. Sorry, what?
they do fitness is uh, it's work capacity across broad time and modal domains. That's their definition of fitness. So that's why it's like you can do a 1 rep max and you can run because that's broad time, broad mode.
Right.
But then they add in their definition of health, it's over time or as you age. So it's the ability to do a variety of things as you age. That's the definition of health. And I found it's helpful to me as I think about my workouts and what I want to be doing in the gym.
It's yeah, I mean, as someone who played professional sports, and I know what I signed up for. In the NFL, you're not thinking you're going to come out this like relaxed and uninjured, perfectly fit person. You're signing up to bang into other human beings as fast as you can. It's car accidents, and so recently I've gotten into my like mid to upper 30s, and I'm starting to go, okay, like things are changing. I'm not 24 anymore, and I could just lift heavy. I could throw the bar on my back, and so I've had to make some shifts that are interesting. So like I don't load my spine anymore with a bar. I do a lot more functional stuff, so a lot more varying lunges in different directions, just some like Turkish get up type stuff. Because like to your point, it's like, what do I want to be able to do? Well, I've got 4 kids. I love wrestling with my kids. I love throwing them around. Some of them are little, some are probably a little too big to be throwing around now. But it's like I love to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so, how do I still have fun with them and play basketball with my son? And so I'm box jumps, and it's all about just trying to be available physically for my family in ways that I got to see my parents not be available, and that was hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I just retired the back squat this year, I
Did
think,
you?
because
Yeah.
I love that, and it would take me so long to warm up to get,
Yes.
and it would take me so long to recover that I'm having a hard time with my kids in the pool because I'm trying to rep 405 and why?
Yeah.
For who? Who cares? My wife doesn't even know the difference between 225 and 405. She's not impressed. She doesn't care.
She
Like
don't
she's
care.
not invested in my squat number going up. If anything, I hurt my back doing gym stuff, and she's like, "You're kind of a loser because you should not care about that." I need to,
But you'll know, Seth.
but I
You'll
know,
know
yeah. But I
that you're
want to pivot.
weaker.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to pivot.
exactly.
So
That's good.
I'm with you now. I'm doing Bulgarian splits and
Hmm.
other stuff that doesn't hurt my lower back, and it feels pretend, but I also know it's objectively better for my well-being than the alternative.
Yeah, working out can actually give you life, and you could feel good after you're done and feel more flexible, have more dexterity, and be more mobile. And like it doesn't have to beat you down to the ground. And to be honest, a lot of the training for football was like that. It was like, okay, I feel terrible after it, but I'm functional, and I'm flexible and all that stuff because that was necessary. But a lot of that, your muscles are in disrepair for so long afterward. To your point, like your back squats are you can't bend over because your like quads are in the middle of recovering, your glutes are in the middle of recovering. But yeah, like for regular guys, I think. Like, what do you think about like maybe we could just do like a little bit of a like let's say if someone's listening in, they're like, okay, but I wasn't in the NFL. I didn't play volleyball. I didn't do CrossFit, but I do want to get in shape. I do want to start thinking about this in a meaningful way. What would you like suggest to somebody like that? They're like, I'm getting involved. Like, how could they start?
I do think the best workout program is the one you do, and I think finding a way to enjoy it is the key. Like
Hmm.
whether you're doing classes at your local big box gym or go to CrossFit, make some friends so people will give you brotherly shame when you sleep in or something like that. A little
Yeah.
social pressure goes a long way. If someone's just going to the gym, they don't know what to do. I generally recommend it's great if you went and did Zone 2, walk on the treadmills, keep your heart rate between 120 and 130. If you do that twice a week, maybe hit the sauna 3 or 4 times a day for 10 minutes. You do a little push, a little pull, maybe some lunges. And by push and pull, I mean like a bench press or a dip or a like on a machine. And then make sure you work on those lat pull downs, rows, things like that, kind of push and pull. I think for a lot of people, if they did a push pull day twice a week, a kind of walk the stairs for a chunk of time, and then they do some like box step up descent type things to like work on not falling as you age. That would kind of be to me like the minimum viable dose. That's probably like two and a half hours a week of what people need to do. And I think that would get people pretty healthy. That would kind of check all the boxes on trying to die slower, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think there's other things too that, like I talk to some guys who do want to gain muscle, they want to gain weight, they do want to look different in a t-shirt, they do want to be more attractive to their wife, or they do want to be more attractive to a woman who they hope will become their wife. And I don't think that's all bad either. Like I think, if you think about the temple, the instructions of it in the Old Testament, like there's a lot of adorning happening, a lot of care and regard. Like it's like just like you want to have a haircut and take a shower, it's not wrong to go, I would like my clothes to fit a certain way. I would like to present a certain physical presence. And so I do want to gain 10 pounds of muscle. Okay, well, that's different. Now you kind of have to care more about your protein intake. You have to care more about things like creatine start to matter. Things like intensity and rep schemes start to matter. And there's a lot of great information about that all over the internet. But I don't think it's pure vanity or like vainglory is like the old word for pride, to want to care about your appearance. Because I think, we put on clothes today and we put on stuff that doesn't look stupid on purpose, right? And so the adorning of the temple, I don't think is a bad thing. Just like fashion doesn't matter. And, having to buzz your face so you don't look like kind of like just a bum because you got a big neck beard going on. Like that's not a bad thing either.
Yeah.
So I don't think wanting to be attractive to your spouse is inherently vain or problematic. I do think comparing yourself to professional MMA fighters who are certainly on a whole bunch of artificial hormones, that's just a black hole that's going to go bad. And trying to be honest about who you're comparing yourself to and why, I think is part of the soul work that has to happen. Once you start going down that bodybuilding path, it's kind of a trap. Like the male body dysmorphia thing, like there's a study that came out of like 18 to 25-year-olds, I think out of UK, that said 54% of young men exhibit signs. So it's not a clinical diagnosis, but they exhibit signs of body dysmorphia, like not liking their bodies. And so I do think there is a real trap there that people need to be mindful of. Once you start caring about appearance, of just going, okay, well, there's a trench here that I might fall into, and I need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's a line for anything when it comes to spending money. There's a line you shouldn't cross. And when it comes to, your love for what you do, for your vocation, there's a line. There's a line in everything. And just because there's a line doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue the positives in it. And that's what I've been trying to explain to people as it relates to their health. There's a longevity aspect, there's a well-being aspect, there's a performance aspect, and there is an appearance aspect. My wife looks good. I want to look good for her. I agree with you. I don't think that's a bad pursuit. And yes, that you could go too far with it, and you could fall off the other side of the ship and go into the bodily neglect side of things as well. It's kind of the age-old battle we fight kind of any direction. We're kind of stuck. And it's the sort of godliness that needs to anchor us in the pursuit of whatever we're pursuing. It's tough.
Yeah, I think John Calvin talks about this in his opening of the Institutes of Christian Religion. He talks about how like all wisdom, it begins with like two things, knowledge of God and knowledge of self. And I think what he means there when he's talking about knowledge of self is just like your own personal predisposition to certain types of sins. Like recognizing that what some person may be like wildly preoccupied or predisposed to just bodily neglect, suicide by lifestyle. Someone else might be wildly predisposed to looking in the mirror way too much, being preoccupied, bodily dysmorphia, and it can become all-encompassing. I do think, like you mentioned earlier, statistically speaking, there's more people on the neglect side than there is on the obsession side. But there's certainly some people listening who are more on that direction than the otherwise. And it's just worth being aware of your own trap you might fall into.
Do you have any daily physical things you do? You mentioned it before. I can't remember if it was a podcast or a blog, but men fall into these like escapism habits or these passive habits. How do you think finding good positive habits, training like we talked about or other things can maybe help push back against the sort of passivity? And do you have any of your own that you do?
Yeah, I think so. My typical routine is my alarm goes off at 5:30. I take my pre-workout and I read my Bible for about 20 minutes, and then I go to the gym. And I really try to not have headphones in at the gym. Probably 90% of the time I don't, unless there's like a podcast I have to listen to for work or something like that. And that's usually a time where I'm trying to like be aware of my body. Sometimes I've gotten injured at the gym, or when I'm like half paying attention to what I'm doing and I'm super invested in what I'm listening to, then I move weird. And so it's both like a self-preservation thing. Like I need to be mindful of what I'm doing in here if I'm trying to sling weights. But then it's also like, then I can feel my thoughts, pray my prayers, quiet my mind, and not just kind of be perpetually receiving input from the outside world. So I stay off social media. I try to stay off podcasts, try to stay off music. And I just kind of look like a crazy person at the gym, with no headphones in doing my thing. And so I feel like that really helps me. I do find that when I don't do that, I tend to get a busier heart, a more anxious mind, a more preoccupied spirit. And I tend to kind of get input fatigue in a way that kind of creates like a low grade anxiety. Whereas when I am having that kind of digital detox plus physical workout thing in the morning, it does kind of create a better baseline for me that I then act out through the whole day. So I do that Monday to Thursday. That's my typical routine. On Fridays, my wife and I work out together because we both have Fridays off. It's kind of like a marriage time, right? And so I also don't have headphones in when I'm working out with my wife because that would just be really awkward.
Yeah.
But I have found that is a difference maker for me and my soul, is that if I'm off social media, if I'm off podcasts until I'm done with the gym in the morning, then I do have a quieter spirit, more of a congruent with the spirit presence. I'm able to be more present with the people in my life. I feel like my emotional awareness, my relational presence, it's all just better if I can just push all that back till being done with the gym time. And even then, I tend to go to the sauna and I talk with people in the sauna. And I've had like a lot of wild evangelistic opportunities in the sauna, done marriage counseling in the sauna. And so just trying to be present with people before I'm present with digital world somewhere else. And I'm not perfect at that, but I definitely notice a difference on the tone and tenor of my spirit when I don't hold that boundary.
That's really good, man. I'll just moment of confession. I'm like glued to my headphones, and I think there's probably people like me, but I don't know what it was, but when I got out of the NFL, I just couldn't interact with regular people, and that sounds terrible to say, but what I mean by that is I wasn't used to people coming up and just interrupting me and talking. And that was something that just for my entire college and NFL career, that was not something people did because there was a time of focus. And I found myself like using my headphones as this like cocoon to keep me away from interacting with people. And so whether it's music or maybe now more recently, as as I'm working out less intensely, it's podcasts and stuff like that, but I'm trying to stay away. But I notice how like that low grade anxiety you're talking about is there. And I'm like, oh man, like I feel that now because I am having this like incessant outflow or inflow of information. And that does stress me out. And I have done some of the hot tub, sauna, no headphones things in order to sort of disengage. And I have noticed an improvement. I feel like maybe if nothing else, that your little testimony there will help me be more present and maybe go like the psychopath to the gym without headphones. I think I might try that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do think like the too much information thing gets to me. And if I'm checking Twitter, checking the news or reading a podcast, I'm going, I got to preach on Sunday. I got to love the people right in front of me. And I'm filling my mind with what's happening in Japan politically. I don't need to know about this. And so
Yeah.
it's like the entertainment side, or I'm like just reading way too much about the Pacers game plan for the game, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
I care, like it's entertainment. I don't need to know it. And it creates a busy heart. And it's really hard to love someone when you have a busy heart. And so I feel like I'd rather just kind of be a little weird. And then even now at the gym, people kind of know I'm a pastor. So every now and then people come up to me and ask me about random stuff. And it is different when you're like training versus when you're like doing social hour at the gym. That's just, and a lot of people are there to do the latter, not the former. And
Yeah.
so I've never really had it be my job to train. So I don't know what that would even entail, but that'd be a weird shift to make. We're going like, I'm at work right now. Stop interrupting me. Like, this is my job.
Yeah.
Versus just people who are kind of trying to get to the office a little late and get a little bicep pump. It's just totally different energy you bring to the place.
It's just about ego dying. I just got to let it go. You know what I mean? It's just time. It's time. Seth, thanks for being on, man. Authentic Masculinity is the podcast. Where can people find more about you online, your church, all that stuff?
Yeah, so my website, sethtroutt.com, I mostly have it there to put all my articles there so they can find me in one place, because I do some for Christianity Today, some for Gospel Coalition, World Magazine, other places like that. So if people want to read stuff I've written, my website's the best way to go there, sethtroutt.com. And then I'm on Twitter. I'm like barely active on Instagram. It's probably not even worth following me, but you can if you're really, really bored. But on Twitter, I do post more stuff, Seth_Troutt, Troutt. Our church is Ironwood Church. If you're ever out in the Southeast Valley, Phoenix, Arizona, love to meet you. It's a great church. I love being part of it. Great for my wife and kids.
I love that. I'm going to link everything in the show notes for you guys. So make sure you go check out Seth's website. He's written some awesome stuff on Christianity Today. I'm a huge fan already, man. So Seth, thanks for being on, man. This is fun.
Thanks, Eddie. Great getting to know you.